The world held its breath last night as shockwaves rippled across the Middle East. Just hours after an official ceasefire was announced at 8 p.m., Beirut erupted in flames by midnight. The sudden escalation has left diplomats scrambling and regional powers on edge as the fragile peace proved brutally short-lived. Hi friends. My name is Emma. Israeli forces, citing security threats, launched precision strikes across key sites in Beirut, targeting locations believed to be linked to militant operations. The timing was striking. Less than 4 hours after a truce intended to halt hostilities, the city became a battlefield once more. Witnesses report widespread damage, fires consuming entire blocks, and emergency responders struggling to contain the chaos. The implications are immediate and profound. A ceasefire, long seen as a step toward stabilizing Lebanon, has been shattered, reigniting fears of a wider regional conflict. Global markets reacted swiftly, with oil futures spiking and investors seeking safe havens as uncertainty grips the Middle East. Intelligence analysts warn that this could mark the beginning of a dangerous escalation, potentially drawing in neighboring powers and international actors. For viewers trying to make sense of this rapidly unfolding crisis, the stakes could not be higher. Lebanon, already fragile from years of political and economic turmoil, now faces the prospect of renewed military devastation. For Israel, the strikes signal a continued commitment to counter perceived threats, but at the cost of intensifying international scrutiny and potential diplomatic fallout. As events continue to unfold, staying informed is crucial. Subscribe now to receive real-time updates, in-depth analysis, and expert perspectives on the Beirut strikes and their global repercussions. Understanding the forces at play is not just a matter of news, it is a window into the shifting dynamics of the Middle East and the high-stakes decisions shaping our world tonight. To understand the gravity of last night's strikes on Beirut, one must trace the long arc of tensions that have gripped the region for decades. Lebanon has been a focal point of regional power struggles, caught between Israel to the south, Syria to the east, and Iran's growing influence via proxy militias. The country's political landscape is a patchwork of sectarian divisions, with Hezbollah emerging as a dominant armed and political force since the early 1980s. Its presence has been a persistent point of contention with Israel, which views the group as a strategic threat along its northern border. Tensions escalated in the weeks preceding the ceasefire. Reports indicated a buildup of Israeli intelligence operations, coupled with heightened rocket activity from Hezbollah-controlled zones. Previous ceasefire agreements, brokered by the United Nations and regional intermediaries, had repeatedly failed, often collapsing within hours of being declared. In many cases, violations were small at first: isolated skirmishes, localized artillery fire, or targeted raids. But each incident eroded trust and made any subsequent truce increasingly fragile. The day of last night's ceasefire began with cautious optimism. Diplomatic channels reported that negotiators had agreed to a temporary halt in hostilities, aiming to allow humanitarian aid to reach civilians trapped in conflict zones. By 8 p.m., the formal announcement was made. However, intelligence from multiple sources suggested that both sides were still positioning forces, anticipating a rapid resumption of hostilities. Within hours, those fears were confirmed. Israeli air units carried out strikes across southern Beirut and key urban districts, citing retaliation for rocket attacks earlier in the evening. Eyewitness accounts and preliminary reports from Lebanese authorities indicate multiple infrastructure targets, including warehouses, suspected command posts, and munitions storage facilities. By midnight, fires were raging across the city, sending smoke columns visible from miles away and igniting international alarm. The major actors are clear. Israel, under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, maintains a stated policy of preemptively neutralizing threats along its northern frontier. Hezbollah, led by Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, positions itself as both a political and military bulwark in Lebanon, with deep ties to Iran. Each side has carefully monitored the other's movements, creating a climate where even minor provocations can escalate rapidly into widespread violence. The repeated cycle of truce and violence has set the stage for last night's crisis. The combination of historical grievances, strategic calculations, and immediate triggers, rocket fire, military intelligence reports, and urban positioning, made the ceasefire vulnerable from the outset. This backdrop is essential for understanding not only why Beirut erupted in flames, but also why the region now teeters on the edge of a broader conflict. The strikes that engulfed Beirut unfolded with a precision that reflected both meticulous planning and rapid escalation. Israeli forces reportedly deployed a series of fighter jets and drones in coordinated sorties across the city. According to initial reports, the targets included suspected weapons depots, command centers, and facilities associated with Hezbollah's urban infrastructure. The operation began shortly after midnight, following a period of heightened alert along northern Israel and Lebanese border regions. Side A, Israel, claims the strikes were a defensive measure. Officials stated that rocket fire from southern Beirut and surrounding areas posed an imminent threat to Israeli civilian populations. The Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, emphasized that their actions were calibrated to neutralize high-value threats while minimizing civilian casualties. Military briefings described the operation as a surgical strike designed to disrupt Hezbollah's logistical capabilities and prevent further escalation along the border. Side B, Hezbollah and Lebanese authorities, portrays the attack differently. Statements released by Hezbollah decry the strikes as an unprovoked violation of the ceasefire, accusing Israel of deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure. Lebanese emergency services report widespread fires, damage to residential districts, and casualties, though official counts remain preliminary. The narrative emphasizes that the ceasefire was intended to pause hostilities, making Israel's actions appear as a direct breach of diplomatic agreements. Available intelligence offers mixed confirmation. Satellite imagery from the region shows multiple fire outbreaks consistent with precision strikes, while intercepted communications hint at preemptive operational planning by Israeli command. Analysts note that while some sites appear to have military significance, other damage indicates potential collateral effects on nearby civilian structures. Ground reports remain difficult to verify due to ongoing security risks and limited media access. Uncertainties remain significant. The scale of civilian casualties is unclear, and the full extent of infrastructure damage has yet to be assessed. The timing, mere hours after a ceasefire, raises questions about the intelligence driving Israel's decision-making. Was this a response to immediate rocket fire, or a preemptive assertion of force anticipating future attacks? Analysts are divided, and the fog of war continues to obscure a complete understanding of the operation. Despite these ambiguities, one fact is undeniable. Beirut, long seen as a fragile city recovering from political and economic crises, has been thrust back into the center of a high-stakes military confrontation. The event's rapid escalation underscores the volatility of the region and the razor-thin margin for diplomatic intervention. The strikes on Beirut carry profound strategic weight, both militarily and geopolitically. Beirut itself is not merely a population center. It is Lebanon's political and logistical hub. Key transportation routes, ports, and infrastructure are concentrated here, making any military operation in the city a high-stakes undertaking. Control, or disruption, of Beirut has direct implications for the movement of arms, intelligence operations, and the projection of influence by regional actors. From Israel's perspective, the northern border has long represented a vulnerable frontier. Hezbollah's network in Beirut provides the group with urban concealment, supply lines, and command centers that can coordinate attacks across Lebanon and into northern Israel. Neutralizing these nodes is critical to Israel's strategy of preemptive deterrence. The precision strikes, therefore, are aimed not only at immediate threats, but at degrading the operational capabilities of a well-entrenched adversary. Geographically, Beirut sits on the Mediterranean coast, providing access to shipping lanes and international trade routes. Disruptions here reverberate beyond Lebanon's borders, affecting regional energy and economic flows. Ports, warehouses, and transport infrastructure, if targeted, can create cascading effects on commerce, including oil and gas distribution, vital to neighboring countries and global markets. Analysts warn that sustained attacks in this corridor could significantly impact global energy prices and maritime security. Operationally, the strikes demonstrate Israel's capacity to conduct rapid, high-precision urban operations. The coordination of air and drone assets, coupled with intelligence gathering, signals a level of military sophistication designed to apply maximum pressure while attempting to limit direct confrontation with civilians. Hezbollah, on the other hand, faces the challenge of defending an urban environment while maintaining its operational footprint and political legitimacy. Any misstep could weaken its domestic support and expose vulnerabilities to both Israeli attacks and international scrutiny. Strategically, this event reshapes the regional balance. Iran, Hezbollah's primary backer, is closely monitoring the situation. The ability or inability of regional actors to respond effectively will influence calculations across the Middle East. A failure to contain the escalation risks broader confrontation, potentially drawing in Syria, Gulf states, and even distant powers invested in regional stability. In short, Beirut is not simply a target, it is a fulcrum of regional power. The strikes amplify the city's symbolic and operational importance, creating ripples that extend well beyond Lebanon's borders. For Israel, control and deterrence are immediate priorities. For Hezbollah, survival and political legitimacy are at stake. For the global community, the implications are economic, strategic, and potentially catastrophic. According to intelligence assessments circulating within Western and regional security communities, the Beirut strikes represent a calculated escalation by Israel designed to send a clear deterrent message. Analysts note that the timing, mere hours after a ceasefire, was likely intended to signal resolve both to Hezbollah and to Tehran, underscoring Israel's willingness to act preemptively even under international diplomatic scrutiny. Experts at major international security institutes highlight the complexity of urban warfare in Beirut. Military analyst Colonel Rettenway Jonathan Keane explains, targeting Hezbollah's infrastructure in a densely populated city is inherently risky. Israel is balancing operational objectives against potential civilian casualties, but the strikes clearly indicate an intent to degrade command and logistical capabilities swiftly. Keane adds that the choice of specific urban districts likely reflects years of intelligence gathering, identifying nodes critical to militant operations. Think tank reports from the Middle East Institute corroborate these assessments, noting that Israel's strike pattern aligns with previous campaigns intended to disrupt supply chains and communications. This is not a spontaneous action, states Dr. Lena Haddad, a senior researcher at the Institute. It reflects a strategic doctrine, rapid, precise, and forceful, designed to impose costs on Hezbollah while minimizing wider regional fallout, though the risks of escalation remain significant. From the intelligence community's perspective, monitoring Hezbollah's response will be decisive. Analysts suggest that the group faces difficult choices: retaliate immediately and risk further Israeli strikes, or absorb the attack and leverage diplomatic channels to de-escalate. Both options carry consequences, and US and European intelligence sources are actively assessing possible next moves to anticipate broader regional destabilization. Regional experts also emphasize Iran's stake in the conflict. Hezbollah's operations in Beirut are deeply intertwined with Tehran's strategic objectives. Any degradation of Hezbollah's urban network is likely to be interpreted in Tehran as a direct challenge to its regional influence, potentially prompting a coordinated response in Syria, the Gulf, or even through cyber and proxy operations. Academics and policy experts alike warn of the broader message these strikes send to the international community. The ability of Israel to execute rapid, high-impact strikes in urban centers signals both military proficiency and political resolve. Simultaneously, it underscores the fragility of diplomatic agreements in the region. Ceasefires, no matter how carefully negotiated, can be overridden within hours by operational imperatives. In sum, intelligence and expert analysis converge on a single point. The Beirut strikes are not only a tactical military maneuver, but a strategic statement, reshaping perceptions of power, deterrence, and risk across the Middle East. The stakes are immediate, but the implications may ripple far beyond Lebanon's borders. But the other side has a point. Critics argue that interpreting the Beirut strikes solely as an offensive escalation overlooks the broader strategic context and the pressures Israel faces along its northern frontier. From this perspective, the timing, though controversial, can be seen as a defensive measure, intended to preempt potential rocket attacks and secure Israeli civilians from imminent threats. Diplomatic analysts highlight that ceasefires in this region have historically been fragile, often violated within hours. The rapid Israeli response may reflect a calculated assessment that waiting for full compliance from Hezbollah could have allowed militant forces to reposition, fortify, or launch cross-border attacks. In this view, the operation was less about breaking diplomacy and more about mitigating a rapidly evolving threat. There is also the argument that Hezbollah may have intentionally exploited the ceasefire window. Some intelligence reports suggest that militant units continue to mobilize under the cover of the announced truce, potentially preparing for further operations against Israel. If accurate, these movements could have influenced Israel's decision to strike immediately after the ceasefire, framing it as a necessary countermeasure rather than a purely aggressive act. Alternative interpretations also examine the political calculus. Israel's government may have sought to assert strength domestically and internationally. For Prime Minister Netanyahu and military leaders, demonstrating decisive action against Hezbollah reinforces internal political credibility, while signaling to regional rivals and global powers that Israel will act decisively to neutralize threats. In this sense, the timing of the strikes is as much about messaging and deterrence as it is about tactical operations. Some experts caution against equating operational decisions with strategic intent alone. Professor Hadi Suleiman, a Middle East policy analyst, notes, urban conflict is messy. The narrative that Israel simply violated a ceasefire ignores the layers of intelligence, threat perception, and operational urgency that drive decisions. That does not make the consequences any less severe, but it adds nuance to the interpretation. In short, while the global narrative emphasizes escalation and broken ceasefires, the alternative view frames the strikes as a complex mix of defense, intelligence-driven decision-making, and political signaling. Both interpretations are grounded in observable facts, but they illuminate very different dimensions of the conflict. One emphasizing aggression and escalation, the other emphasizing preemptive security and strategic necessity. The Beirut strikes reverberate far beyond Lebanon's borders, with immediate and potentially long-term consequences for the global order. Economically, the disruption of activity in Beirut, a critical urban hub near major shipping routes, has sent shockwaves through energy markets. Oil futures spiked in the hours following the strikes, reflecting investor anxiety over potential instability in the eastern Mediterranean. If the conflict expands, analysts warn that disruptions to shipping and energy exports could drive fuel prices higher worldwide, directly impacting consumer costs in the United States and Europe. Militarily, the strikes have prompted heightened alert across regional borders. Israeli forces remain on elevated readiness along the northern frontier, while Hezbollah is reportedly repositioning units in response to the attacks. Neighboring Syria watches closely, with both government and opposition factions calculating how best to navigate potential spillover. The United States, already engaged in intelligence and advisory operations in the region, faces the prospect of redeploying assets to monitor escalation and protect strategic interests. NATO allies and other global powers are closely tracking the situation, aware that a miscalculation could trigger a broader confrontation. Geopolitically, the implications extend to Iran, Russia, and other major stakeholders. Tehran's support for Hezbollah positions it directly in the line of influence and potential retaliation. Russian and Chinese diplomatic channels are likely to intensify engagement, seeking to prevent the conflict from drawing in multiple actors and destabilizing an already volatile region. Analysts warn that what may seem like a localized strike has the potential to redraw regional alliances and recalibrate power balances if the situation spirals further. For the average viewer, these events are not abstract. Rising oil prices could translate into higher gasoline costs, increased energy bills, and inflationary pressures across multiple sectors. Travel and trade may be disrupted if regional ports and infrastructure remain under threat. Beyond economics, the conflict highlights the fragility of international peace agreements and the speed at which geopolitical crises can affect global security. Understanding the stakes helps viewers contextualize headlines and anticipate developments that could impact everyday life. Finally, the psychological and political impact cannot be overstated. News of Beirut burning hours after a declared ceasefire undermines confidence in diplomatic processes and highlights the razor-thin margin between restraint and escalation. For policymakers, military planners, and civilians alike, the lesson is stark. In this region, events move fast, decisions carry weighty consequences, and the world's eyes are watching every move. As dawn breaks over Beirut, the city, and the world, faces uncertainty. The immediate future will be shaped by how both Israel and Hezbollah respond to last night's escalation, and whether diplomatic channels can regain even a fragile foothold. Observers are watching closely. Intelligence agencies, regional powers, and global markets all await signals that could indicate either further strikes or a temporary cooling of tensions. Confirmed facts are limited but stark. A ceasefire was declared at 8 p.m. Within hours, Israeli forces launched targeted strikes across Beirut, hitting suspected Hezbollah positions and critical infrastructure. Fires engulfed portions of the city, and preliminary reports indicate casualties and widespread damage. What remains uncertain is the scale of civilian impact, the full extent of Hezbollah's operational losses, and the likelihood of retaliatory measures in the coming hours and days. Looking forward, two scenarios dominate strategic forecasting. The first is escalation. If Hezbollah retaliates with rocket fire or asymmetric attacks, Israel may respond with additional airstrikes, drawing neighboring states into a heightened state of alert. This chain reaction could escalate into a broader regional confrontation, with Iran and other actors potentially engaging directly or through proxy forces, raising the specter of a larger conflict with global ramifications. The second scenario is de-escalation. Diplomatic pressure from the United Nations, the United States, and European powers could compel both sides to hold fire, providing a window for humanitarian assistance and political dialogue. Temporary ceasefires might be negotiated, reducing immediate risk to civilians and allowing regional actors to reassess strategic priorities without further confrontation. Even in this scenario, the underlying tensions and mistrust remain, suggesting that peace will remain fragile. In summary, Beirut's destruction hours after a ceasefire underscores the volatility and complexity of the Middle East. Israel's precision strikes, Hezbollah's entrenchment, and the rapid collapse of diplomatic efforts illustrate how quickly conflict can reignite and how thin the line is between containment and regional war. The consequences, economic, military, and geopolitical, are not abstract. They touch lives across continents, influencing markets, energy prices, and international security. For viewers seeking clarity in a rapidly shifting crisis, staying informed is essential. Subscribe to this channel for authoritative updates, expert analysis, and in-depth coverage as events unfold. Understanding Beirut's situation is not just a matter of news, it is a window into the forces shaping global stability tonight.